I want to talk about this guy Timothy Leary. Um, Despite the bad narrative and stigma around LSD at this time, he is sort of a pioneer in America. You know, vying for LSD. So what who is Timothy Leary, and what's his role in this story?
Well, Timothy Leary was kind of a square professor for psychology at Harvard. He had been at West Point before. He had developed, for example, a personality test that was still used quite a long time. I think even by the CIA. It was called the Leary. So if you wanted to have a job, you had to do the Leary, like the test. So he was a normal psychologist, and then he was on vacation in Mexico, and a friend gave him psilocybin mushrooms, which are kind of similar to LSD. And he didn't want to take them at first. He wasn't interested in it, but then he took them and he had a profound psychedelic experience. And he thought while he was on these mushrooms and later on that he learned more about the human mind and psyche than in all of his textbooks that he had studied. So he became very interested in it. And in the beginning, Harvard was also kind of behind him. Like he did, groundbreaking new work at the university in Harvard in the early 50s. And at one point, he ordered quite a large amount of LSD and psilocybin from the Sandoz company. And as I mentioned before, Sandoz had made a pact with the CIA to inform them all the time who would order like large amounts. And the CIA was against that order was fulfilled, and they stopped it. So Leary didn't receive the quite large amount of LSD. He wanted to make like a huge program now, turn on a lot of students and really work with them and change them, because he thought that actually LSD makes you a better person, um, which has not been proven scientifically so far. I mean, we know that it works as an antidepressant. We also know that it works against dementia, but we can't really say it turns you into a better person. I think if you're, for example, a Nazi and you take LSD, you could still be a Nazi on LSD. You might even think that your ideas about racial superiority are even more valid, and but he thought he was not naive, but he was optimistic that that if you take LSD, you become like a peace-loving person. You will not hurt anyone anymore. And he connected it with the spiritual experience you will have, that you will realize we're all brothers and sisters. So it's a very very hippie-esque thinking on Leary's part. And when he couldn't get those that order from Sandoz, he tried to get it from the black market. That's kind of how black market LSD started. And he took a lot of LSD and became like a spokesperson, like a guru for LSD. Other LSD researchers then said that he did actually quite a lot of damage to the LSD research, because he kind of overdid it and he politicized it, while the other researchers were more interested in like the medicinal effects, like what actually happens in the brain. Can we improve the human brain? Can we heal mental illness through LSD? And he was more into stopping the Vietnam War by turning on millions of Americans to LSD, and then they would take off their clothes and dance naked in the mud, basically, and not put on a uniform and kill innocent Asian babies. So that's and but the American government at the time wanted to kill innocent American babies, because that's what not officially, obviously, but that the Vietnam War led to a lot of war crimes, and it was a very ugly war. Um, so that was actually the reason why LSD then also became illegal in 1966 under the Democratic President Johnson, who wanted to continue with the war in Vietnam, and who was scared that the peace movement, which was quite influential and large at the time, would be a problem for the war effort, because the mood in the American public was not very positive in regards to this war. There were a lot of And if the mood changes in a country, then it becomes even more difficult to sustain the war. So Leary became, I think Nixon called him enemy number one of the state or something, public enemy number one. He was imprisoned. Like, he's a good example for how you can use anti-drug regulation to punish individuals, because he was caught with like 2 grams of marijuana or something, which is nothing. I think they were hidden in the underwear of his wife while they were crossing a border from Mexico to the U.S. They found this, and then he was sentenced to 17 years in prison or something like that. He actually fled prison. He was freed by the Weathermen, which was an underground resistance organization back in the days against capitalist America. So, and then he fled. He was living in Afghanistan, and he was in Switzerland, and then at one point he was captured again, and he was again in prison. But I mean, Leary it's a story in itself. I only touch him like peripherally in Tripped because it's interesting. He once had a visitor from Washington called Mary Pinchot, who was a good friend of John F. Kennedy and wanted LSD from Leary for an important friend of hers, which was probably JFK. And that was in the spring of '63, the same year he was assassinated. And then Kennedy gave his famous peace speech at the American University, where he also talks like a hippie and says, we should end the arms race. We're all in this together. We all live on the same planet. The Russians are also human beings. We should extend our hand. We should stop making weapons. We should, use our resources differently. So maybe that was the LSD influence that he received through Mary Pinchot. Maybe that was just a change of mind he had in general. Maybe that was the reason why he was assassinated. So Leary is an interesting character within the '60s, obviously.
Yeah, it was a fascinating story from the book. And obviously, one of the big questions coming out of that is, did JFK really take LSD? Because you see that shift from, a typical Cold Warrior to this peace loving guy. We need to end this. I think also what played into that was the Cuban Missile Crisis. That sort of scare gave him a new perspective on that. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, he started talking against the arms race. But this guy, Timothy Leary, like you said, he's kind of the spokesperson for LSD. He has a bus driving around the country trying to give LSD to people, making a movement. Um, and this sort of, like you said, Nixon declared him, enemy number one or whatever. This really contributes to the anti-drug policy of the politicians. But can you say that Leary and LSD sort of created the counterculture hippie movement that we saw throughout the 70s?
I mean, John Lennon at one point said we have to thank the CIA for giving us LSD, because the CIA was basically, as I described when I talked about MK Ultra, responsible for making LSD famous. Like, they gave it to a lot of people. It was a very obscure thing before. It was used by scientists and very controlled, but the CIA gave it to a lot of people through these safe houses in San Francisco and New York, Operation Midnight Climax, and they also gave it at one point to Ken Kesey, who was a young aspiring writer who took LSD and suddenly saw his new bestseller, which was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and wrote it. And then this was actually the bus you were talking about, rode around in a bus and just distributed LSD freely to everyone who wanted it. So in a way, the CIA opened Pandora's box, and then people who were, influential, like Leary or Ken Kesey or the Grateful Dead, the music band, and they distribute it on a larger scale, and that fueled the '60s counterculture movement.
Yeah, 100%. I think opening Pandora's box is a great way to put it.